everybody. Morning, John.
Morning, Roger. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Have a good week?
I had a great week. Yeah.
Flying the friendly skies?
Flying the friendly skies.
There you go. God bless you. Thanks for being up there.
Been a good time. Loads are picking back up a little bit after the holidays and stuff. So, but it's been good.
Good deal.
No complaints.
Gotcha. We're at Psalms 59 this morning. I had to double check for myself. We've been in the 50s for a while, so we're in 59, and let's jump into it.
Sure. So Psalm 59, the header on this one is for the director of music to the tune of "Do Not Destroy" of David, a miktam, and once again we said one of the definitions for a miktam could be a psalm that teaches you something. When Saul had sent men to watch David's house in order to kill him.
Bum, bum, bum.
Yeah. So for that story, we go back to 1 Samuel, and I'm going to start in chapter 18, just real quick, because David was, once again, Saul had his misgivings about David. He was afraid of David. He had his, Saul felt threatened by David, and he would get those dark moods upon him. And so basically in Psalm 18, Saul decides he is going to try and another tactic for David. He thinks, well, if I give him in marriage to one of my daughters, then I can send him into battle. He'll be one of my generals. He'll be under me, and I can just have the Philistines kill him, and he's out of my way. Yeah. So he tries to get him to marry his first daughter, and David says, I'm not worthy. I'm just a shepherd boy. I have nothing, and I can't marry the daughter of a king. And so that one passes. He marries her off to someone else. But then he finds out a younger daughter, Michal, is in love with David. So he says, perfect. I'm going to set those two up. And he says, and also it's kind of interesting, in verse 21 of chapter 18, he says, I will give her to him, he thought, so that she may be a snare to him, and so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. So David said, so he said to David, you have a second opportunity to become my son-in-law. So the way that Saul rectifies the problem of the poor boy marrying the king's daughter is he gives him a conquest to go do. He sends him out against the Philistines, says, bring me back 100 Philistine foreskins from dead Philistines, and I will give you my daughter. And David goes out and he brings back 200. So he doubled it, brought it back.
Yeah.
So
man.
Yeah. So they get married. And then later on we get in chapter 19 the famous passage about where for the second time Saul tried to kill David by pinning him to the wall with a javelin. He flees, he goes home, and Saul sends men to watch David's house. And that's where we come to verse 11. Starting in verse 11 of chapter 19 says, Saul sent men to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, if you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. So Michal let David down through a window, and he fled and escaped. Then Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed, covering it with a garment and putting some goat's hair at the head. When Saul sent the men to capture David, Michal said, he is ill. Then in verse 15, then Saul sent the men back to see David and told him, bring him up to me in his bed, so that I may kill him. Just bring the whole bed.
Bring the whole bed.
Just carry it on.
Carry it down the stairs.
That's right.
But don't let him fall out.
That's right. But when the men entered, there was the idol in the bed, and at the head was some goat's hair. So then in verse 17, Saul said to Michal, why did you deceive me like this and send my enemy away so that he escaped? And Michal told him, she lied, said, he said to me, let me get away. Why should I kill you? In other words, he threatened me, and so I let him go. And then David fled and escaped. He went to Samuel at Ramah, and he told him all that Saul had done to him.
What a story.
Yeah, exactly.
What a gal.
Yeah, exactly.
Wouldn't we all like a wife like that?
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, well, wait a minute. Not necessarily.
So we wonder about, the fact that she's supposed to be a snare to him. One, in the snare from the literal standpoint of this was a means of control that Saul could send David into battle against the Philistines. But also I always wondered if the snare wasn't part of the fact that he knew that she was an idol worshiper, and maybe he could entrap David in another way. Right. Because, obviously she put the idol in the bed. And remember later on down the road in 2 Samuel, that when David was bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, that he was dancing in the linen ephod, and it's, David dancing naked is the title that gets put in the Bible all the time. But he's dancing in his linen ephod, and Michal is very angry because that wasn't a behavior befitting of a king, and he basically shunned her from that point forward.
Yeah, it's an interesting story all the way around. I mean, the reality is, who else do we know of in Scripture that tried to send a man in battle to get him killed?
Yeah.
So David did that with Uriah, and now Saul's doing that with David. And so I think
actually one preceded the other.
Well, yeah, but okay, right. But the reality is, I guess that was a pretty common tactic.
Sure.
To get rid of your enemies, send them into battle. And so I think that part of the story is interesting to me. And then the whole with Michal or Michelle or however we say her name, it's interesting that she was more faithful to her husband than she was to her father.
Yes.
I think that's even though Saul's intention of marrying them was, as you said, to have control of the household, obviously they developed some type of relationship, her and David, that she felt more inclined in a loving relationship with David than she did with her father, which tells a lot that Saul's, my intonation of that is Saul's fanatical mood swings. Others may have experienced that other than just David.
Yeah.
She may have experienced that growing up, and so she was like, I need to protect people from my father. And with all the mood swings and depressions that we encounter with people today, I have heard family members say, I need to protect you from my brother, from my father, because of mood swings. And so that's normal behavior. And the other thing I find interesting too, that you kind of alluded to, was, this wasn't 4 or 5 days a week in planning. I mean, that night she said, you need to escape or you're going to be killed tomorrow. And David left, and she just happened to have a life-size idol sitting in her bedroom. So it wasn't like she had to run out to the store and find one,
right,
or go to the idol temple and borrow one. I mean, she obviously had a life-size idol.
Call Amazon and have it delivered.
She obviously had one right there in the palace. And she was able to lay it in the bed. And so that tells me a lot about the household environment that David had. That even though he was very consistent in encouraging people not to worship idols, and found that part of his ongoing commitment to the Lord right there in his house was somebody that worshiped idols. And so that's a head scratcher for me too. So, but a fascinating story, and obviously the point of it is that they weren't successful.
Right.
I love it too that wrap him up in his bed, just bring the whole stinking bed.
Exactly.
I want to make sure you got him. So tuck him in tight and bring him to me.
Yeah.
That's just a great imagery to think about. But David, God protected David in the midst of all this, and we see this account as a further demise of Saul's reputation. I mean, I see that what God is doing and what David is in a sense orchestrating, in the fact that he had multiple opportunities that we've talked about in the battlefield to kill Saul, and he refused to. Here's another situation where he could have greatly embarrassed Saul by having David's loyal soldiers do something or something like that, and he chose not to. He chose to go and hide and report to Samuel the misgivings and the failings of the king, and it sees how all this kind of building a case for craziness of the political leader of the king of the day. And I think that was obviously it turned out well for David.
Yeah, it did.
So that brings us to Psalm 59.
Yeah, so Psalm 59, probably written later in David's life because of when we read through it, he talks about the nations as well. So he's had time to reflect. He thinks about, this situation in his life, but also about how, once again, he's going to talk about the Lord God Almighty and his God being greater than all the other gods of the other peoples, the Philistines, and so on. So anyway.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think he does that in the sense of God show up and work your power.
Yeah.
I think is basically, if we wanted to boil the psalm down in one line, I think that would be it. God show up and defend us.
Yep. And also still that overwhelming thing of you are my place of refuge.
Mm-hmm.
Refuge is
Right.
another big point in there.
Big point. So let's kind of walk through the psalm and just kind of take it apart as we go and see what God has to say to us as David wrote this. Psalm 59, it says, "Deliver me from my enemies, O God. Protect me from those who rise up against me. Deliver me from evildoers and save me from bloodthirsty men." Again, that God, we've seen that opening line in a variety of different ways in all of the Psalms that we've looked at over the last several weeks. That just getting right to the point. Deliver me, protect me, pick me up out of the mire and set me on a high ground. I mean, that's literally the imagery of what David is getting at in this psalm. God not just kind of clean up the mess, God not kind of make the path clean. It's literally pick me up and remove me from this situation. Almost like the prayers of Jonah that we talked about this morning. Take me out of the stomach of the whale and place me on a higher ground. Remove me from the quagmire and the mud. So deliver me, O God, from my enemies. And then it's interesting to me not only the different words that David uses throughout this psalm for the evildoers, but also the different names David uses for God. So he calls his enemies different names, and he also refers to God in different names. And we're going to see that throughout it. So just in this first verse, he calls them enemies, he calls them evildoers, he calls them bloodthirsty men. And then in verse 3, "See how they lie in wait for me. Fierce men conspire against me. For no offense or sin of mine, O Lord. I have done no wrong, yet they are ready to attack me. Arise and help me, and look on my plight." You get the imagery, at least I get the imagery, and I want that David is in his palace seeing the men that Saul sent gathering. They're down there in the driveway, almost, if we could say it like that. And they're kind of conspiring. They're deciding who's going to go here and who's going to cover this door and who's going to cover this window and who's going to knock the door down or whatever. And he's literally, you get the imagery that he's literally in his window looking down at the palace grounds watching this take place. Mm-hmm. And he said, "See, look at them. They're lying in wait for me down there. Fierce men conspiring against me for no." And he says, I've done nothing wrong.
There's that language again. It's David pleads his case, like almost like he's in a courtroom at times in the Psalms, and he's before the judge, and he's saying, search me and know that and that I'm righteous, and that that I am innocent. He speaks of his innocence a lot.
Right, and I think that just goes back to what we talked about a moment ago, that throughout this Saul-David relationship, David continually says, "Search me, God.
Right.
You know my heart. I'm innocent here. This is weird stuff going around me, leadership over me, and they're conspiring. They're saying evil things. They're conspiring to do me harm, and yet here I am, loving my wife. Mm-hmm. She may have an idol or two, trying to clear those out. We all. But that I'm a person seeking after you and doing your will, and I think that just brings the whole imagery that whether not specific of this situation, but I think we all find ourselves in a similar boat like that, in the sense that the evil one is accusing us. The evil one is on this continual prowl, accusing us of wrongdoing, when in actuality, it's not wrongdoing. That's just Satan making lies about us, and I think that's how we can relate to all of this. Not necessarily saying that you have somebody over you in leadership or authority that's railing against you and spewing lies. That may be the case, but if not the case, you got the evil one over you spewing lies. And so I think that's how we can relate to it. And in verse 4, I have done no wrong, yet they're ready to attack me. And then he just says again, arise to help me, look to my plight. God, recognize my situation. I think we get that sense over and over from David throughout the Psalms, of God, hear me, hear my cry, look upon my situation, know what's going on with me. And we have the confidence not only in the God of Israel, but in the Holy Spirit, that the Holy Spirit is always with us. And it's just that our human desires of wanting to make sure, God, are you here? Are you looking at me? God, are you there?
Right.
It's I don't think it's doubt so much as just I need affirmation. I remember one time in my life where I remember saying, and it's been many times, but I know there has been one particular experience where I remember standing beside my car in the parking lot and saying, God, I need to know, I need to physically feel forgiven. I need to know the burden of guilt is removed. And I'm sitting here today saying, God answered that prayer in the moment. And I think that's kind of what I see David doing is God, I know you're there, but I need to feel you and see you working in this moment. And I don't think that's a bad prayer to pray.
No, I don't think it is at all.
I don't think it is at all. So anyway, verse 5. I think in verse 5, it's interesting. It says, O Lord, God Almighty, the God of Israel, rouse yourself and punish all the nations. Show no mercy to the wicked traitors. And I think here's where Roger was referencing a moment ago about where David not only prays for the wicked men that are gathering in his driveway, but he prays for all the wickedness of all the nations. And so I think here's kind of where that is. But before we get there, right there again, we talked about the different words David used for his enemies. Here, David uses 3 different words for God. He says, O Lord. Again, that's Lord all in small capital letters, which means the word Yahweh, the name that God gave to Moses at the burning bush. So he says, O God. Then he says, God Almighty. God, you are the most powerful God of all the gods. You are high above all the gods. So that's the name for God there. And then he says, the God of Israel. Not only are you the God above all gods, but as the God above all gods, you are also the God of your people Israel. So he calls him 3 names. Yahweh, the Most High God, the God of Israel. Rouse yourself. Come to my help. Punish, not only punish these guys, but while you're at it, just wipe out all the nations.
Yes.
And show no mercy to the wicked traitors. And I was laughing because, it's almost the sense that David's pulling out all the stops. It's like when your sweetie's mad at you, you go, oh honey, oh sweetie pie, oh cooker of all meals, oh, oh lover of my soul. Honey, you pull out all the words hoping that one word you throw out is the one that works. And so I don't want to belittle what David's doing, but I think David is kind of pulling out all the stops. He's calling God all the names he knows that are valuable at this moment to come and help him, to rouse, to move. God, I need to know. Literally, not only are the nations all wicked, and we're dealing with those, as Roger said, probably later in life, he's dealing with the wickedness of the nations. Not only deal with the wickedness of the nations, God, but I really need you to deal with these guys in my driveway.
Yeah.
And so then you get that pause. You get a rest. You get a break. You get the word Salah. It's kind of a pause. And in looking through the psalm, you kind of you see a verse and then kind of 2 refrains and a verse in the middle. So we start that verse 6, if you want to look ahead. verse 6 and verse 14 say exactly the same thing. So that's like where the refrain starts. They return at evening, snarling like dogs, and prowl about the city. And so he's calling them dogs. They're just roaming around, snarling.
Yeah, dogs in the Near Eastern culture, unlike today, where dogs are man's best friend and go everywhere with. Dogs were not looked upon favorably. They were a dirty animal. They were known for eating the dead. They were known for licking blood. They were despised by the people. So dogs was a very, very bad reference to someone. I mean, you at the very basic of evil.
They wouldn't name their college team the Wolverines.
No.
Or
the Bulldogs.
Or the Bulldogs. Bulldogs, that wouldn't have been. No. They wouldn't. Exactly. So, but he calls it. And not only are they nasty and dirty. I mean, basically the garbage, the refuse removal system was dogs, and so not only were they dirty animals roaming around in his driveway, but they're snarling, and they're prowling vicious. And they're vicious and they're looking for somebody to devour. They're looking for some garbage to take out. And David knows in this particular moment the garbage is him.
Well, and they're hunting for blood.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that imagery too of the dogs are hunting for blood, and it's David's blood.
Yeah, it's David. And in verse 7, see what they spew from their mouths. Again, not only he kind of shifts, I think, the imagery from the dogs to the person. They're spewing vile things out of their mouths. They spew swords from their lips. They say, "Who can hear us?" I mean, the imagery is so clear that they're right there in the driveway. Exactly. They didn't have windows. There was no glass. Yeah. There might have been some kind of cloth for a curtain, but they're right there. And David says, they're down there talking about me, thinking that I can't hear them when I can hear them. Mm-hmm. And then we know how in courtyards sound carries, and so it's just kind of, the imagery that David is right there in the midst of these people. You see that over and over in this verse. And so David says, they say he can't hear us, when he says, yeah, we can. You wonder why he didn't taunt them.
Right. Well, verse 8 he kind of does.
Oh, yeah, he does. That's right. Yeah. But you, O Lord, laugh at them and scoff at all the nations. You're right. He's up there laughing at him. Yeah. And probably, I want to think he does throw down some taunts himself. Yeah. So again, and then he pulls in all the nations. Not only do your magic with these guys down there, and you know what I mean by that. Do your wonderful work to these, but while you're at it, go ahead and clear out all of the nations. And then the refrain kind of ends again. Oh my strength. Again, more names for God. Oh my strength, I watch for you. Oh God. There's Lord, you are my fortress, my loving God. And so in this one verse, he mentions 4 additional names of God. Oh, my strength, oh God, my fortress, my loving God. Again, he's kind of listing out all the names for God to have God come to his aid in this moment.
Yeah, the fortress, once again, is that impregnable place of refuge where no one can harm you because God is in supreme control.
In a lot of the Psalms, David uses kind of 2 words. He uses fortress a lot, which is kind of that high, almost like a castle turret kind of deal, a castle tower, as Roger said. Something built inside the city, inside the palace for protection, specifically built for protection from enemies. And so fortress is one word. Another word David uses is refuge. And refuge kind of has the connotations of something out in the countryside, something out in the community, a cave, a tree, something natural that you can hide from enemies. And so when David, Psalms 23 and Psalms 46, you are my fortress, you are my refuge, there's this imagery that I like to look at, that God, we need to know of places we can hide at home
Mm-hmm.
and when I'm out in the community.
Yeah,
You
and
know?
it's against evil people, but also against the weather and the elements were
Mhm.
another big thing in the storms. So it's that whole context of place of safety and comfort.
Yeah, and I think we all have that.
Mhm.
There are places in my home that I go to and I sit and not because I feel like there's people outside about to attack me, but just that I have a safe place
Mhm.
that I can go in my home. There are places in the community that I go, near bridges and by views of the water where I know I can go, and in this place I feel a peace and a closeness with God. And I think we need to have those. We need to have those places of fortress, and we need to have those places of refuge.
And hopefully our church is that place of
Yeah,
refuge
yeah,
too. Because
right.
that's the way I feel when I
Yeah.
come to church.
Right.
Is that
Sure.
when I get in that sanctuary, it's a place of refuge for me.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
hopefully,
Yeah.
and I think once again, I'm going to plug our Monday morning prayer meetings.
Mm-hmm.
That is a great time to just experience that refuge at another time, at another level. So
Right.
please come out Monday mornings,
Yeah.
9 a.m.
Right, exactly. 9 a.m. on Monday mornings in the worship center. And I think that hour, again, with COVID, we understand some of you are uncomfortable coming out to a worship center. And so you can see that hour as both. An hour, if you come to the building, it can be a fortress. Or if you want to stay in your home at that 9 o'clock hour, that would be either one. It could. I was mixing my metaphors there, and I just realized that if you're staying at home, it could be a fortress. If you come here, it could be a place of refuge, or vice versa. And I think just that imagery, I think, is helpful to me as we study Psalms, where we see what David's talking about. But anyway, moving on. Where were we?
Verse 10.
Verse 10. Thank you, man. Yeah, my God will go before me and let me gloat over those who slander me. But then he goes on in verse 11, but do not kill them, O Lord, our shield. There's another word for God. O Lord, our shield. Or my people will forget. In your might, make them wander about and bring them down for the sins of their mouths, for the words of their lips. Let them be caught in their pride for the curses and lies they utter. So in other words, I think David is saying, God, and let me, if I can be so bold as to make a suggestion to you, God.
Yeah.
Don't just wipe them out in the moment. Just punish them.
Yeah, punish them and make them an example.
Make them an example. Because if you just wipe them out and they go away, we're going to forget.
Yeah.
We're going to forget about this situation because, again, that's how our human nature is. But God, if you just punish them, if you just make them wander about in their shame, that will do more for protecting us as your people than just wiping them out and us forgetting. And I think that's wisdom on the side of David, asking in his prayers for God to do that. And I think you get the sense that let this be a learning moment, not just for me, not just for Saul, but let this be a learning moment for the whole city and the nation of Israel, that you come to protect us. And on a daily basis, we will see these snarling dogs almost with a leash on and a collar on now, wandering around our community in their shame. And you feel bad for those people that he's talking about, but I think what I see is David's trying to turn this into a learning moment for all the people of Israel.
Yep, I agree.
He says, he is real specific. Punish them for the sins of their mouths, for the words of their lips. Let them be caught in their own pride. God, just kind of shame them and let us learn from them to learn that words matter. Our words matter. Leaders' words matter. The words of their mouths, they're caught in their own pride. Let them see that. Consume, verse 13, consume them in their wrath. Consume them until they are no more. Then it will be known to the ends of the earth that God rules over Jacob. So there's the teaching moment. We want people all over the earth to know that God rules over Egypt. And God rules over Jacob. That's an interesting line.
Very
Excuse
interesting.
me. Interesting line. Where it's also used, Roger went back to 1 Samuel 18 I want to go back one more chapter, 1 Samuel 17. Here's what David says as he's about to kill Goliath. In 1 Samuel 17, verse 46, David says, "This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down, and I'll cut off your head. Today I will give the carcass of this Philistine army to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the earth, and here it is, the whole world will know that there is one God in Israel." Mm-hmm. So almost the same line David's referencing back to saying we want all the people to know that there's one God that rules over Jacob is basically the same line he used as he wanted the world to remember one God rules over Israel, and we want you to learn that from the death of Goliath.
Yeah, and remember, God never intended for Israel to have a king. That wasn't his purpose. Right. God wanted to dwell among his people, wanted to lead his people, and so they had the tabernacle, and mobile God was there in his tent with the people, and so God wanted to be their king. He didn't want an earthly king, but the people said, "We want to be like everyone else. We want a king," and so that's how Saul originally became the first king, and then David, and in the lineage also. Right. So there's that reference in there about the God that rules over Jacob. He's taking the earthly king out of it. Right. The God that rules over Jacob, the God that rules over Israel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're in charge, basically. Yeah, we want to. I think David in his awareness of what's going on in this moment and with Goliath knew that you're God. Yeah. You're in charge. Yeah. And I think he reiterates that point throughout his life and his leadership, that God, you are the most important. Interesting. And then in verse 14 we have the repetition of verse 6 from back up, the same exact wording. They return at evening, snarling like dogs, prowl about the city. But then in verse 15 he changes it up a little bit. They wander about for food and howl if not satisfied. But in the midst of their howling, you almost get the same imagery. As the dogs are singing, as the dogs are making noise, as the dogs are doing what they do, but David says in verse 16, "I will sing of your strength in the morning. I will sing of your love, for you are my fortress. You are my refuge in times of trouble." Again, there's those two words. So David says, as the dogs are howling and making noise, I'm going to howl and make noise of your love and your graciousness and your strength. And I'm going to sing not only tonight as they're wandering around, but I'm going to sing in the morning. Yeah. Another way to look at it is we have these two images, verse 6 and verse 14, where the dogs are downstairs snarling around. And in 1 Samuel 18, you have Saul's men coming twice. Mm-hmm. So, you could look at it both ways, that the first time the men came, and Michal said they're sick. That could be verse 6, and verse 14 could be when they're returning, and they're coming to pick up the whole bed, and they find that he's gone. So there's lots of ways you could look at that. Then verse 17 it ends again. A new name for God. "Oh, my strength, I will praise you. Oh God, you are my fortress and my loving God." A same repetition, verse 17 of verse 9. And so that kind of ends the psalm. Great, interesting psalm.
Yeah, very interesting.
Again, just David crying out to God to come to his aid. Yeah. And I don't want us to ever think that "Come help me, God" is not a valid prayer.
Well, David says God came because in verse 9, he says, "You are my strength, I watch for you." Mm-hmm. And then in verse 17, "You are my strength, I sing praise to you." Because so he was watching, and now there's the little, you've been here. I sing.
You showed up. Yeah, you showed up. And I think I want to encourage you today as we wrap this up, that in the midst of hardships, in the midst of struggle, in the midst of angst, whatever you might be going through, whatever I might be going through, you are following a righteous man's example when you say, God, I need you to show up, and I need you to show up now. I need to know you're present with me. Rouse yourself, as David says in verse 5. Rouse yourself and punish all the nations. God, I need you to show up and take care of the vile people around me. That's a valid prayer. And I think in the midst of that, in the midst of saying that, I think we need to be cautious and give God praise. You know, and remember that in this moment, David doesn't pray for them to be slaughtered. You know, David prays for them to learn. And I think that's another interesting aspect of it, that there is humility in his cry for help. God, I don't want you to destroy him. I want you to keep them alive, but let us all, them and us, all learn from this situation. I think that's a good word for us.
Yeah, I think so also. And just even in a general basis of just watching and waiting on God, and then whether it's in an interpersonal situation like what this has been, or just for other needs in your life, but proclaiming what you need, watching, and knowing that God is your strength, and then looking for that answer to prayer, and then praising God for it.
Praising God, and when it's all said and done, in the midst of it. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Roger.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, and thank you for watching. God bless you. As we always say, be wise, be safe out there. Put your masks on. More need than ever to be wearing your masks. And closing, be the church.
Be the church.
God bless you.